Welcome back to Understanding Human Intelligence. In Step 17 of this Institute of Practical Learning course on self-awareness, we're talking about how the thought paths in your mind are different according to thinking and feeling. Then we get on to questioning and how you can question in a socially intelligent way to engage with both the emotional and the rational aspects of another person's mind.
What I've decided to do today, rather than do something easy, is do something difficult, would you believe? I'm hoping it'll energize me as I talk to you. And this is stuff that you probably won't find anywhere else. It's sort of things that I've learned over the years working in business. Let's start at the very easy level. The purpose of this lecture or session is to help you raise your self-awareness. As with all teaching, let's go from the familiar to the new. Talk to you about yourself and your mind and how your mind works. It's very often that they say you have a left and a right hand brain. You see pictures of heads. You have a spinal cord, and then there's this sort of wobbly thing called your brain. And they say it's kind of split into a left and a right hand side. Inputs, when you see these diagrams, they kind of show you inputs coming in up your spinal cord or something, going into a particular bit of your brain just there. And then it's suggested to you that you perform certain functions in certain sides of your brain. So it doesn't really matter which is which. One is reckoned to have a thinking side, let's say thinking, and a feeling side. So this is more about logic and reasoning, and this is more about imagination, creativity, and it's generally reckoned to be more of a visual side, so seeing. And this side is more about saying. Now, this is an extremely simplistic model, and of course it's not anatomically accurate, but it is a first step on trying to address this subject of what goes on inside your mind and seeing the extent to which we can track your thought processes as they go through these, as I said before, fiendishly complicated steps to help you make a decision, or in this case, to help you learn. So I'm very interested in this process. I've tried to analyze it over many, many years. I read stuff on the biology and what goes on in your hippocampus and your cerebral cortex and all that sort of malarkey. But of course, mankind is just at the very, very beginning of having any comprehension whatsoever of what's really going on inside your mind, because it's so complex. Your mind has far more going on inside it than the entire internet. So if you think of all the different computers that are currently connected to the internet, and there's going to be millions of them, and millions of billions perhaps of users all connecting to the internet. Even all of that is not as complex as your brain is. And in fact, your brain is actually connected up in a way that I will come to because it is relevant. But let's stay with this. So now, when I talk to people about the soft skill of questioning, you may have seen this in the videos that I cover. I use a model called 5W2H. Now, I'll have to look back and see whether I've done a video on this. If I haven't, I think I should. But I'm sure if you watch the Cypress tapes and the Corbin dialogues, you'll see this coming up all the time. And what it stands for is who, what, why, when. That's your 5 W's. No, it isn't. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's another one, where. So that's the 5th W. And then how, that's the first of the 2 H's. And then how much. So it's 5 W's, and two H's. Now, 5W2H works okay as a descriptor in the English language, but of course in other languages those words are different. You know, it's K and con and and so on and so on. You know those words, I don't, and you're going to have to use your own acronym. So this is to do with questioning. And clearly when you do question someone, you're trying to find out what's going on in their mind. So it might just be that you're looking for a fact. I might be asking them, who are you meeting tomorrow? That could be a who. It'll be a name. And it's also, you're telling them, you want to know who you're meeting, who they're meeting tomorrow. So you're putting in a time, a name at a given time. So this question is already a who question, and the data you're seeking is the name of someone, and you've specified the time frame. Now, each of these questions can be structured like that. So what are you going to do tomorrow? Why are you going to see them? And so on and so on and so on. So when you're questioning, there are all those rational aspects to the question. But that same question can be pitched, if you like, asked in 4 different ways, 4 broadly speaking different ways. And those ways are to do with what that person is thinking or what they're feeling. So you're interested in their thoughts and their feelings, and the way you direct the question to their thoughts is you say, what would you say about going to Shogun restaurant today? So you're looking for a rational saying type answer. What would you say? And in that case, assuming it's the left-hand side of the brain, you'd actually be targeting the information you want from that person at 1/2 of their brain. Now, the other way you could put the question is, how do you feel about going to a Shogun restaurant later today? So that's a feel. One was, what would you say to go into Shogun? And the other is, how do you feel about going there? So that would be more directing the question to this side of the brain and using a how question. It's clumsy, but continuing with the example, you would say, can you see yourself paying the bill? I don't know why I thought of that. Can you see yourself to paying the bill? What you'd be doing there is kind of going down the seeing, feeling side and sort of trying to see how they feel about paying the bill. Or it could be neutral. Shall we share the bill? Or it's my treat. That's a statement. So this whole business of conversing, using questions, and the way you ask the question, you can in fact direct the question at different sides of a person's brain. And you'd be surprised how often you get a different answer about how they feel about something and what would you say about something. Seems obvious that it's the same piece of information you're seeking, but in actual fact, they will have a different emotional response and attitude to answering a think or say-based question to a see and feel-based question. They're the 4 ways of structuring a question, and you get different answers pretty much every time. So that's think, feel, see, say. Now, why do you get different answers when you ask questions like that? Now, I am going to pause for a moment. So I paused just then with the why question. Why do you get different answers when you pose the same, basically the same question, but you pose it in different ways? And the reason is that the question comes into the person's mind through their senses, obviously, the inputs. And inside your mind, inputs come in, whether it's sound or sight, all the other senses, they initially come into a subconscious part of your mind. Some people call it your unconscious mind or your subconscious mind. It doesn't really matter. The way your brain has structured itself through nature and nurture is to take inputs and process them in a certain way. You learn this skill, this capability as a child, because when you were first born, all these inputs didn't mean much to you. But as you grew up, and as I've mentioned to you before, as you become more conscious and eventually you finish up by the age of 7, when you've got all these things analysed and sorted, you have learned to react to the world, to the sights and sounds and feelings and inputs that you get, and you bung them all as they come in into this area of your mind, which we're calling your subconscious. And the next thing I want to talk to you about is what happens in your subconscious and how does your subconscious mind decide what to do with those inputs? Because the inputs may be urgent and valuable to you, or they may be irrelevant and boring, or they may be entertaining, or whatever they may be. In a business sense, they may be important, but not necessarily immediately. Maybe you hear something and you think, I better remember that because that's going to be useful. So all of this goes on inside your subconscious, and it makes decisions in fractions of a second, very small fractions of a second, about what it's going to do with that information. And when I'm teaching, and when you're out there yourself seeking information, you're collecting information, you're putting them into this subconscious, and there's a very, very interesting process that goes on in there, which, if you approach it in the right way, can help you learn and change and prosper. So I'm going to stop at that stage because
this is essential to understand, I believe. But it is a bit complex, and to be honest, I haven't really got the whoomp for it right now. I'm sorry, I'd love to have it, but I think I'm just going to have a rest. So let's regard this as a very kind of simple and obvious introduction. I'm going to suggest that you don't do too much note-taking at this point, but watch step 18 before you start to really dig into this. Step 17 is just a very almost childlike introduction in itself. And in step 18, we're going to take it a lot further, and then you will be empowered to revisit the whole way you ask questions, how you listen, how you think, and how you can use your emotional intelligence and your social intelligence.